My name is Talia Dorsey, and I'm an architect and founding principal of a design agency called The Commons Inc. And I'm also an adjunct professor at McGill University School of Architecture. Architects are almost always working in the unknown. It's part of the project, right? I mean, you have an empty site and you need to design a building for it. So you're always working in kind of the unknown future. And you're also working with something that hasn't been designed yet. You're conceiving it yourself. So, reading becomes an incredibly important tool to start to understand what we're even dealing with. So it might be the history of a site. It might be, sort of contemporary articles about what's going on. It might be the newspapers, to understand what are some of the societal questions that are surrounding a given building or a new purpose or a new project that's been put on the table. So from kind of understanding the legacy of thought all the way to sort of the very contemporary, just kind of current affairs that surround a given project, reading is still a very critical element of our practice. Writing becomes a really critical part of the process in many ways. Sometimes we're applying for grants, right? Or also sort of when we're writing proposals to clients, right? We have to be able to articulate what it is that makes us different, how it is we might approach that project. And if we're not able to do that in a way that easily communicates or effectively communicates what we're doing, then in a way we've shut the door before we've even entered it. So it can sort of start a project, and then the other important thing is you're maybe seeing sort of behind me is that, again, another legacy. I think a big influence from the office that I worked for before founding my own practice was that every project would get produced as a book. So every project was documented in book form, and that became an incredible tool. I mean, one, just a beautiful way to document the projects that then you can refer to through time, but also an incredible way to kind of communicate with clients and, again, sort of other practitioners or people or friends or colleagues, is just to sort of have that book and be able to leaf through it, be able to hand them the book so that they can read through it and understand the project even in your absence. That's an important skill, is just being able to not just listen, but really hear what people are saying, and so sometimes you might, it might be someone just giving a talk, or it might be just a friend, telling about their experience when they went to that coffee shop and, what a good time they had with their friend. But if you actually start to really listen to what they're saying, it had to do with the environment they were in, it had to do with the character of the light of that space, it had to do with the intimacy of the spacing of the tables, or, so there's a lot of clues to sort of design that you can actually start to identify when you really learn how to listen properly and to really hear what people are saying. And that's a very small example, but similarly you can, when you start to understand how people are conceiving of their cities, for instance, which is another scale that's very interesting to us from a design perspective, how do you actually hear what people are saying about their cities, and how do you translate that into design motivations? And then lastly, of course, I mean, on a very kind of practical side, in the case of if you were to design a house for a client, again, the capacity to very much listen to their needs, right? So that you're not just imposing your design and your vision of what their life should look like and what their dwelling, might become, but you're actually sort of hearing and listening to what they might need, what they anticipate they might need, and understanding how to sort of show that and reflect that through a design that sort of resonates with what they're saying. So, and that's really not even just a sort of nice thing to do. It's kind of a necessary thing to do as an architect, because I think if you're not successfully manifesting essentially their needs and ideas about what they want their space to be like and what they want to live within, then ultimately you're going to fail. I think ultimately if you can't answer to those needs in a very sensitive way, then your project has, you're diminishing the odds of your project being successful or even accepted by the client. In architecture school, one of the key things too are reviews. So typically the way it'll work is that you, as a student, will develop a project. You'll meet with me as a professor on a weekly basis to review, discuss how the development of that process. But then periodically through the semester, you'll have times where you pin up all your work on the wall. You either have your professor or a series of people that come to hear you out. So you present your project to the critics, and then the critics will give you feedback. And you do that before the class. And I think from a pedagogical standpoint, the thinking has always been, as a student, you need to learn how to communicate your project to an audience, and you need to be able to take feedback and understand how to process that into a revised design. Again, it's not just something that's nice to do, but it's actually, one, critical in terms of self-fulfillment, because you actually learn how, to kind of do justice to the richness of the ideas and thinking that have gone into a project. And how do you make a semester's worth of work, how do you sum it up in 5 minutes and do it justice, right? I mean, that's a challenge. But it's also important because down the road, being able to communicate a project in 5 minutes or 30 seconds or half an hour and learning the difference between those different things is absolutely essential, because if we can't communicate the richness of ideas verbally, then in a way we're totally shooting ourselves in the foot and hindering the potential for, you know, that project to see the light of day. It's maybe not so much literacy skills that, you know, we need to focus on because they unto themselves are something, right? But the worlds that literacy skills will open up, I think, to you as a person and as a student of life and just a student through the rest of your lives, I think is huge.